Welcome to my channel. Tonight, we're going to London, not the London of palaces and battlefields, but the foggy, soot-covered London of the 1800s, a place where thousands of people lived crowded into dark, damp rooms. Come explore the city's hidden past. We'll start our tour in the East End, the neighborhood where the famous Jack the Ripper stalked his victims. You'll wake up early, too early, with the children who lived here. We'll see the beauty of London's hidden past one last time before saying goodbye. Join us tonight at 8 p.m. for this unforgettable journey, sleeping in damp straw beds. We'll follow them as they make their way through the city, past factory whistles and across narrow courtyards. Then we'll take a detour into the foggy, sunlit world of London's elite. Here, the air is thick with the smell of roasting meat and freshly baked bread. The Thames River was so polluted that Parliament had to flee. Can you imagine? The stench of coal smoke and sewage hung heavy in the air. We'll watch as families dine by candlelight and listen to their polite conversation. But our tour isn't over yet. We have one more stop to make. It's time to experience the great stink of 1858 firsthand. Now it's time to go. As the fog lifts, imagine waking before the city truly stirs. You are not awakened by sunlight, not in this part of London, but by the shift of weight near you, the soft murmur of someone turning over, and the faint, aching cold that creeps through the gaps in the window frame. It is a typical morning in the East End. The year is somewhere around 1875, but it could be any year. Time here does not rush. It lingers. Days feel like echoes of the one before, each barely distinguishable from the last. Your eyes open to the sloping ceiling just above your head. The wood is dark, warped by years of moisture. A line of old paper peels downward in the corner, revealing rough plaster beneath. The ceiling leaks when it rains. It rained last night. There is no single odor, only a mixture of many, not pleasant, but familiar. There are no pajamas here, only layers meant to be worn, day and night, until they are stiff with grime and thin from wear. A woman mutters something inaudible and then sighs. The building is alive with sound, but it is not noise, only the soft stirrings of life. Your shirt once belonged to someone else, perhaps many others. The buttons don't match. That loose plank near the door, it will squeal if you step on it, and your brother, still curled nearby, will grumble in his sleep. You breathe it in without thinking. It is the scent of home. When someone changes clothes, they do so in silence, turn toward a wall, hoping for a bit of dignity. Bathing is rare, and when it happens, it is done quickly, with a bucket and cloth, while others avert their eyes. You can feel it in the dampness clinging to your bedding, or rather, to the old sack stuffed with straw that serves as your mattress. The room is small, very small, not to let in fresh air. There is no such thing here, but to let the room breathe. A mist slips in, cool and heavy outside. The alley is quiet, dim, lined with crooked stones and broken brick. A cat picks its way through discarded scraps. Laundry hangs limply from ropes strung between buildings. A pair of boots lies near a puddle, one missing its sole. It contains your entire family, mother, father, perhaps a sister or two, maybe a baby still swaddled in torn linen. Everyone sleeps close. It is the only way to stay warm. There is no fire left in the hearth. The ashes are cold. There is no coal left. Perhaps, if you're lucky, someone will find a few bits of cinder later today, scraps tossed from a wealthier home, still warm enough to rekindle. The air smells of wet wool and dust, of cooked onions and lingering illness. You sit up slowly. The blanket you slept under is more whole than cloth. Beneath it, you are fully dressed. You sleep in your clothes, everyone does. Your breath curls visibly in front of your face. It's cold. Your fingers, when you press them to your face, feel like stone. You rub them together, but they resist the warmth. It will take hours to feel your toes again. Somewhere above you, a board creaks. A neighbor is waking to. Below, a muffled cough rattles through the floor. A baby cries in the next room. You rise, carefully. The floorboards are uneven, and you know where to place your feet. There is no privacy in this home. There are no doors, only thin curtains, if even that. There is a single chamber pot in the room. It is nearly full. Someone will need to empty it soon. Perhaps that someone will be you. You open the window an inch, not to let in fresh air. There is no such thing here, but to let the room breathe. A mist slips in, cool and heavy. The sun is up, but barely. The day is beginning, but without drama. In this part of the city, even the mornings feel tired. She hums as she works, the quiet, tuneless rhythm, not because she's happy, but because it keeps the silence from pressing into close. She wears two shawls. Her boots have been mended 5 times. The laces are wire. Outside, the alley is quiet, dim. lined with crooked stones and broken brick. A cat picks its way through discarded scraps. Laundry hangs limply from ropes strung between buildings. A pair of boots lies near a puddle, one missing its sole. One knuckle is still red from when the iron handle of the stove slipped and burned you last week. You decline. You have no coin, and your boots are not worth shining. You are not sure if he is asleep or simply still. The sound echoes between buildings, calling its workers like a shepherd's bell. Another will sound soon, and another, each one a reminder that time does move forward, whether you notice it or not. You didn't cry. There wasn't time. The light is soft, gray, but still young enough to feel the weight of that truth settle slowly on your shoulders each morning. Some mornings, there is bread. Others, only tea. Today, there is something in a tin. Maybe porridge, maybe the end of last night's cabbage. You eat in silence, seated on a crate or the edge of a cot. The warmth is brief. You savor it. Your mother moves slowly. Her hands are cracked, her hair tied with string. She wraps the baby in another cloth, though it is already damp at the edges. Outside, a cart rattles past. Milk, perhaps, or coal, or something dead being hauled away before the day begins in earnest. She brushes your sister's hair with her fingers. As there is no comb, she braids it carefully. You are old enough to help, old enough to work. You glance at your hands. They are small, but calloused. Your fingernails are lined with ash. Now comes the task of fetching water. The pump is down the street. Not far, a child chases a chicken into a doorway. A man coughs deeply and spits into the gutter. A woman balances a basin on her head, walking briskly toward the corner, but far enough to feel long in the cold. You carry the bucket in both hands. It bumps against your knees. It's heavier coming back. The water isn't clean, but it's what you have. Outside, others are stirring. Doors open. Windows rattle. Voices rise. A boy offers to shine your boots. He's 6. You pass a man with no shoes, sleeping under a pile of newspaper. He does not wake. A factory whistle cries in the distance. Long, shrill. The sound echoes between buildings, calling its workers like a shepherd's bell. A few hold hands, walking quietly toward nowhere in particular. One girl carries a doll, made from a spoon and a bit of ribbon. She holds it close to her chest, humming softly. Your father to the docks, if work is available. Your mother, perhaps, to scrub a staircase or deliver a bundle of mended clothes. And you, to the match factory, or the workshop, or wherever your hands are needed today. Another will sound soon, and another, each one a reminder that time does move forward, whether you notice it or not. Children dart past you. Some carry bundles of sticks, others carry baskets of rags. You return with the water. Your hands are numb. You set the bucket down. The house is warmer now, not in temperature, but in motion, and you will step out into the chill of morning. Someone is sweeping. Someone else is dressing. Your father sits near the hearth, staring into the cold ashes, thinking. Soon, everyone will go their separate ways. Your sister to the laundry. There is no time to sit, no time to complain. No one will ask how you slept. No one ever does. In that first breath of city air, thick with coal smoke and fog, you pause, but you will put on your coat, the one that once belonged to a neighbor as child, and you will pull your cap low. The day has begun, and for a moment, not because it is beautiful, but because it is familiar, because this, in all its cold and weariness, is life, and you are still here. The day has only just begun, and already the streets are stirring with life, or something close to it. There is no such thing as a morning rush here in the East End. Nothing moves fast. Everything is measured in slow steps, lined faces, and bent backs. The sound of the city doesn't rise like a sudden wave. It creeps in, one layer at a time. What matters is whether your hands can grip, whether your fingers are small enough to reach into narrow gaps, and whether your legs can carry you to and from your task without faltering. If they can, then you are ready. Footsteps on cobblestones, a creaking cart, a vendor's voice, hoarse with cold, the hiss of a steam pipe somewhere behind a brick wall. You hear it all as you walk, not with urgency, but with habit. You are on your way to work. You are not yet 12, but age is a poor measure of readiness here. Others hold handkerchiefs to their jaws, eyes red with pain. They whisper about something called phossy jaw. You don't know the name, but you know what it does. The swelling, the smell, the slow decay. Today, your job takes you to a match factory, one of the large ones, near Bethnal Green, the kind with long windows streaked with soot, and doors that clank shut with finality. You avoid the deeper ruts and keep your eyes on the ground. You join the trickle of workers fumbling inside. No one greets you. No one checks your name. You are expected. That is enough. You pass rag pickers already sifting through bins, and a woman sweeping the same patch of stone over and over, as if the action itself might earn her a coin. It takes some time to get there. You walk alongside others, boys with flat caps, girls with shawls pulled tight around their shoulders. Most do not speak. There is nothing to say. The streets are slick with last night's rain, not puddled, exactly, but always damp. At the factory, the gate is already open. Inside, the air changes. It's warmer, not comfortably so, but warmer. The warmth comes not from kindness, but from machinery. The work is simple. In theory, dip wooden splints into a paste of white phosphorus, set them to dry, repeat, over and over. But the paste is sticky. It burns your skin if left too long, and the fumes they linger. Steam pipes hiss along the ceiling. Ovens clatter. There is the constant, dry tang of sulfur, sharp at the back of your throat. The smell clings to everything. You take your place at a table. You have seen the older girls, the ones who've worked here for years. Some have loose teeth. You try not to breathe too deeply. You work quickly, not because there's a reward, but because there's punishment if you fall behind. The overseer walks slowly behind the rows of benches, eyes scanning for idleness. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. His presence alone keeps hands moving. The hours stretch. Time is not marked by clocks here, but by muscle memory. Your fingers cramp, then loosen, then cramp again. Your back begins to ache. Your legs grow restless, but you dare not shift too much. Her fingers cracked from lie. Her back curved from years of carrying water upstairs and cold down them. One spill, one overturned vat of paste, could mean dismissal, or worse. At midday, you pause. Not for lunch, exactly. Just to stretch, sip weak tea, and eat what little you've brought. Some girls go out at night, dressed in borrowed clothes. They return with coins in their fists and eyes that do not meet your own. You do not ask. You do not judge. The rent must be paid. Heavy lifting. Crates of goods moving in and out of the port. Not faster, just heavier, as if every movement carries the weight of the hours already past. Your hands are slower now. The paste is starting to clump. Your shoulders sag. The overseer walks past again, pausing for a moment, then moves on. Some days, there is no work. He waits near the yard gate with dozens of others, hoping to be chosen. If not, he walks home slowly, hands buried in his coat pockets. Sometimes he does not speak at all when he returns. Perhaps a crust of bread, a cold potato, if you're lucky, a slice of meat pudding left over from the night before. You eat with your hands. The women there stand all day, pressing collars and cuffs until their eyes blur, and the steam begins to feel like part of their skin. Napkins are a luxury for another world. Someone near you coughs, a long, hollow sound that ends in silence. No one looks up. No one comments. Illness is part of the work, just as much as the splints and paste and drying racks. In other parts of the city, work looks different. In better neighborhoods, clerks sit at desks, writing with clean ink. Some women do that. They polish railings and mop floors that are never truly clean, hoping for a tip that rarely comes. Shopkeepers count coins in tidy tills. But here, work is hands, and sweat and silence. You think of your mother. She is likely hunched over a washtub now, her arms red from scrubbing clothes for another family. Or perhaps she found day work cleaning a hallway in a tenement a few blocks over. Your sister works too. She's only 14. A laundry shop took her in, a place with rows of steaming irons and walls dripping with condensation. Your father's work is less predictable. Some days he finds a shift on the docks. There are other kinds of work, too, less spoken of. By late afternoon, the pace in the factory changes. Not faster, just heavier, as if every movement carries the weight of the hours already past. A long, tired cry that seems to say not well done. In the winter months, it never feels truly bright, only gray, then darker gray, then something close to night. The street lamps have not yet been lit, but the shadows stretch long across the pavement. But you may stop now. You step back from your station. Your fingertips are yellowed. Your skin smells of chemicals. Someone calls out a name. The streets are busier now, vendors calling, horses clattering past, steam rising from manhole covers. But you are done, for today. He performs for a few pennies. His hands move quickly, but when he drops one, the apples scatter. No one laughs. A woman picks one up and walks away. The boy says nothing. He gathers the rest and begins again. There's warmth here now, not from the fire, which is barely lit, but from bodies. Your father has returned, his hands black with coal. But for someone else, somewhere else. He doesn't speak, but he is here, from presence. Your hands are slower now. The paste is starting to clump. Your shoulders sag. The overseer walks past again, pausing for a moment, then moves on. Eventually, the final whistle sounds outside. The sky is already dimming. There is survival. There is shape. There is life. You begin the walk home. Your feet are sore, not bruised, exactly, just numb. In the distance, you hear a child crying, every day, unchanging, underpaid, unspoken, but steady. You stop briefly to watch a boy your age juggle apples near a pub. You reach your building, climb the same wooden steps, push open the same thin door. Inside, your mother looks up and nods. She is stirring a pot, something thin and bubbling. You recognize the smell. Potatoes, perhaps, or lentils. Your sister is sewing. You sit, your knees crack as you bend them. Your fingers twitch, you rub your wrists. This is the work that waits, and somehow, in the dull rhythm of it all, you lean back against the wall. The cracks in the plaster seem familiar now, like old friends outside. The whistle sounds again, and you are home. The last traces of light are retreating now. Outside the cracked window, dusk has given way to something softer, something heavier. A deep gray hue settles across the rooftops, blending the chimneys into the sky. Not peaceful, but subdued. Each flat, each room, is a tiny world unto itself, yet all share the same thin walls, the same creaking stairs, and the same air, slightly warmer now, but filled with the weight of spent breath, simmering food, and the faint tang of coal dust. Every so often, she pauses to rub her eyes. The baby, if there is one in your family, sleeps in a basket near the window, wrapped in layers of old shawls. His breath is soft, steady. Fog begins to roll in, not dramatically, but quietly, as if it's always been there, waiting. There is no table, just laps and ledges and crates. It is just the kind of silence that settles when people know there's little more to say. A slice of bread, a pinch of tea leaves, a half potato. All is saved. The meal is thin but warm. Root vegetables, mostly. A bit of barley. Occasionally, there is meat, salted and stringy, boiled until it nearly falls apart. Tonight, there is none, but you eat gratefully, silently. Below, a child coughs. The cough is wet and rhythmic. You have heard it for days now. Inside, the tenement building has taken on its evening rhythm. He lowers himself to a stool and begins to unlace his boots, methodically, without expression. His face is lined, his jaw set. But when he looks at your mother, something softens. Even if only for a moment, a man sings softly, almost absently, from behind a door down the hall. An old tune, perhaps Irish or Welsh, or something even older still. You sit on the wooden floor, your back against the wall. Your work is done, for now. The pain in your legs is not sharp, just dull and persistent, like the ache of a psalm that never ends. Your fingers are stained and stiff. You stretch them slowly. The room glows with a weak, yellow light. A single oil lamp burns on the mantelpiece, its flame flickering against soot-streaked brick. Shadows dance across the walls, long, slow movements like the arms of ghosts. Your mother tends the pot at the hearth. The fire is no more than a few glowing embers, but it's enough to heat the thin soup within. Your sister sews in the corner, her needle moving steadily through a worn hem. The sounds of the building change after sunset. They become rounder, slower. Somewhere above, a couple argues, their voices muffled but persistent. A floorboard creaks, a kettle whistles. Your father returns, if he hasn't already. His boots leave faint smears on the floor, wet from the muddy street. He says little. Dinner is served in tin bowls. You each hold your own. No one speaks much. The silence isn't uncomfortable. After the meal, your mother wipes out the pot and carefully stores what little remains. A slice of bread, a pinch of tea leaves, a half potato. All is saved. The same water used again and again, poured into a shallow basin and passed around. You wait your turn. The water is lukewarm, grayish, but soothing against your skin. Then comes the washing, not of clothes, but of hands, faces, feet. There are no nightshirts, no slippers, no bedtime rituals. Often told by your mother as she rubs the baby's back. You know each crack by heart. They form lines, maps to nowhere. You trace them with your eyes, between the quiet exhaustion of muscles and the softness of the moment when the noise of the day finally releases its grip. Old tales of kings and fools, or whispered memories of Ireland, or of villages long swallowed by the expansion of the city. Her voice is low and steady, the kind of voice that eases the sting of hunger and fear. If only for a while. The younger ones are bundled first, then the rest of you lie down. The city outside never truly sleeps, but here, in this room, it rests. The worries of rent, of illness, of hunger, they have not disappeared, but for a few quiet hours, they have faded into the background, like fog into the river, wherever there is space. Across the straw mattress, on a pile of rags, beside the hearth, you change nothing before bed. Some nights, there are stories, simple ones. Tonight, though, there are no stories, just the usual lullaby of the building, the occasional pop of coal in the fire, the creak of settling wood, the sigh of someone shifting in their sleep. Outside, a cart rolls past, its wheels echoing off the walls. A door slams in the next building. A cat yowls. Then stillness again. There are mice in the walls. You can hear them scratching, not frantically, but persistently. In the way your mother's breathing is steady and known. In the weight of the blanket, no matter how thin. In the knowledge that, for now, you are inside. You are not cold. You are not alone. They live here, too. Just another part of the room. As you lie down, you feel the warmth of your sister beside you. The scratch of wool. The rhythm of breath. The ceiling above you is low and cracked. Sleep comes slowly here. It is not rushed. It is coaxed. It arrives in the spaces between thoughts. There is comfort, strange as it may seem. Comfort in the familiar. In the way the room sighs with you. The night stretches on. In the deepest part of the evening, the tenement sleeps. Above, below, beside, families lie curled in darkness. You close your eyes. The room is still, and the slum, for now, is quiet. There is a kind of silence that only settles on a city after dark. Not a peaceful silence, but a stillness laced with listening. The kind of hush that holds its breath. Whitechapel, in the 1880s, lived in that hush almost every night. Here, in the eastern reaches of Victorian London, where the city began to fray at its edges, life was packed tight. Streets were narrow, rooms even narrower. Families and strangers shared what space they could afford, and often what they could not. Alive with laborers, barrow men, costermongers, and children darting between carts. Fish sellers called their wares beside butchers scraping cleavers across heavy blocks. Women rinsed linens in buckets outside cellar doors. Horses clattered past at dangerous speeds. Shouts bounced off the high brick walls, mingling with the whistle of distant trains. By day, the streets were loud, but by night, everything changed. As dusk settled, a different London emerged. The gas lamps lit one by one, not brightly, but faintly, halos of gold behind veils of soot. But most of all, they lived with closeness, a closeness that was physical and constant. Rooms built for two often held eight. Streets meant for wagons became sleeping places for the homeless. Entire families shared a single bed, or half of one. It was thick with coal smoke and chimney soot, clinging to your coat, leaving a film on your lips. So did the peeling posters on the walls, for elixirs, for missing persons, for music hall shows you could never afford. The gaslight reflected in puddles, making them seem deeper than they were. Sometimes they were deeper. It curled into your lungs like something with intent. The fog rolled. In most evenings, low and damp, curling between chimneys and crouching in alleys. It muffled sound, blurred edges, and changed the color of the air. Whitechapel fog was not romantic. It was not the mist of poets. At night, you could walk the same street you walked that morning and not recognize it. Familiar doors disappeared into darkness. Footsteps echoed longer than they should. The buildings leaned close together, as if sharing secrets above your head. Cracks in the plaster told stories. In the space between lamp posts, shadows stretched and pooled. They were not threatening, exactly, but they invited the imagination to wander. Shapes became people. The coat on a peg looked, for a moment, like someone waiting in silence. The people of Whitechapel lived with many things: hardship, illness, noise. In this part of London, no one was truly alone, and yet everyone was isolated in their own private survival. Many who lived here were born into it. Others had arrived with hopes of better work, or simply any work at all. Irish families fleeing famine, Jewish refugees escaping pogroms in the Russian Empire, single women who had left the countryside after the death of a parent, ex-soldiers with nothing to their name but their coat and a cane. It was a melting pot, one not stirred by policy or charity, but by necessity. The work was hard and low paid. Tailoring, cobbling, bricklaying, portering. Factory hours were long, and the docks were unpredictable. If you had a job, you held it tightly. If you didn't, the days grew longer. The nights grew colder. Their dark blue uniforms and tall helmets stood out here. They carried lanterns and notebooks, but not enough answers. Each patrol was an exercise in guesswork, guided more by instinct than certainty. a heaviness that pressed on the back of the neck. People walked a little faster. Doors were bolted earlier. Women lingered in groups before parting ways, and every now and then, a passerby might pause and glance over their shoulder, not because they had seen something, but because they hadn't. People watched them pass with wary eyes. Some resented their presence. Others wished for more of it. No one truly trusted them, not in bold print, not yet, but in columns about petty crime, overcrowding, the need for reform. Reporters walked its streets in daylight, took notes, and left by dusk, restless. Poverty was not just a condition here, it was an environment, something you breathed, something you wore. The smell of tallow soap, dried onions, wet wood, and unwashed fabric filled the stairwells and alleyways. Children played in the gutters, inventing games with bits of twine and tin. A woman's body was found on Buck's Row. Women stood on corners laughing over shared news, stirring warmth from the air with their voices. There was life in Whitechapel, not easy, not sweet, but persistent. Your clothes took on the scent of the street, and your skin carried the imprint of the day long after it ended. Stepped softly into a shadow deeper than any it had known. And yet, there was resilience. Markets opened early. Breads were sold fresh, even if the flour had been stretched. Still, by the late 1880s, that life had begun to feel unsettled. Rumors moved quickly through these close quarters. The slums were places where stories slipped through cracks, carried on steam, shared across dinner tables, and whispered over fences. A man had been found in the river. A woman was missing from Flower and Dean Street. Another beating behind the slaughterhouse. A name muttered near the pump. No one knew exactly what was happening, but something had shifted. The Metropolitan Police, thinly stretched and rarely welcomed, had increased their patrols in the East End. The constables walked their beats through a labyrinth of lanes, alleys, and cul-de-sacs. Many unnamed, many unmapped. In the weeks before the first murder, the city felt the air had taken on a different weight, something between fog and foreboding. The name Whitechapel began to appear more frequently in the newspapers. Some began calling it the Abyss. And then, on a quiet, ordinary night in August 1888, the fog was thicker that evening, the gaslight dimmer than usual, and Whitechapel, already burdened by centuries of hardship. This is where the story begins to change. But for now, you remain on the threshold. In the fog, in the hush, in the half-light of a city that had not yet named its fear. The body found on Buck's Row was not the first to be discovered in Whitechapel, under questionable circumstances. But there was something different this time. It was August 31st, 1888, a Friday, the end of summer. But the city was still warm, still heavy with coal smoke and street noise. People had gone about their routines, working, bargaining, boiling water for tea, folding damp clothes across lines strung between buildings. And then, news spread, quietly at first, from alley to alley, from market stall to factory gate. A woman, her name was Marion Nichols, had been found lying near a stable wall. Police had been called. A doctor had come, and though few details were known, the word passed from mouth to mouth: murder. It was not the murder itself that shocked Whitechapel. They read it while eating thin stew or waiting for the pump to refill, and they moved on. Violence was no stranger here. Men fought, women were struck, children vanished. These were known sorrows. The Illustrated Police News, with its dramatic sketches and fast-drawn conclusions. The headline was simple: woman murdered in Whitechapel. Below it, a column of sparse details. No suspects, no witnesses, only speculation. But there was something eerie in the way the story unfolded. The newspapers picked it up the next day. The East London Advertiser, the Star. People asked, was it the same man? Had someone taken it upon themselves to cleanse the streets? Was this vengeance madness? Or something darker still? Or if they had, they didn't say. Fear hung in the air like smoke. It happened again. They took notes. They patrolled more often, though never enough. Constables questioned drunks and dockworkers. Clerks filed reports with more questions than conclusions. For many in Whitechapel, it was another grim page in a long book of poverty. But then, again, early morning, again, silence, again, no answers. Just 8 days later, September 8th, a Saturday, and both, it was said, had been women of the street, women who lived hand to mouth, renting beds by the night, walking after dark to earn coins. Another woman, Annie Chapman, found in a backyard on Hanbury Street. This time, people began to murmur, to murders, so close together, so similar in mystery, so disturbing in their quietness. Questions began to circulate in Whitechapel's alleys, lodging houses, and pubs. No one had seen the killer. The police began to knock on doors. They took notes. They patrolled more often, though never enough. Constables questioned drunks and dock workers. Clerks filed reports with more questions than conclusions. Many, especially women, began to take different routes home, if they went out at all. The people watched quietly. Some grew angry, others grew withdrawn. By the third murder, on the 30th of September, the fear had found its voice. The first found near Burner Street, the second in Mitre Square, barely within the bounds of Whitechapel, as if the fear itself were starting to spread. That night came to be known as the double event. 2 women killed, just an hour apart, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. This time, the city noticed, and with that noticing came something new. Letters. Most were hoaxes, scrawled in red ink, full of wild promises and strange signatures. But one stood out. They arrived by the dozens, some addressed to newspapers, others to the police. The author claimed responsibility for the murders, signed it Jack the Ripper, and with it, the story became legend. It began, simply, "Dear Boss." It was written in a crude hand, dated September 25th. The tone was mocking, self-assured. No one knows who wrote that letter, whether it came from the killer or from someone craving attention. But the name, Jack the Ripper, stuck. They rarely had the luxury, but their eyes watched more carefully. Their shoulders tensed more tightly, and when they walked home at night, they walked quickly, heads low, keys clutched in tired hands. It was no longer just about the deaths of poor women. It became about something else, something that tapped into the imagination of the city. People closed doors a little more quickly. Some looked at their neighbors differently. Suspicion spread like fog, and in the dark corners of Whitechapel, the name was whispered with real fear. A stranger on the stair, a man with a butcher's apron, a cabman with no fare, a gent in a black coat, who smiled a little too easily. The name was repeated in pubs, in parlors, in Parliament. Newspapers ran it in bold print. Artists drew cruel caricatures. By the time Mary Jane Kelly, the 5th and final victim generally attributed to the killer, was found on November 9th, the city was holding its breath. She was younger than the others. She had a room of her own, a door that locked, and still, it had not saved her. That day, the rain came early. It washed the alleys clean for a while, but the fear remained. The people of Whitechapel did not weep in public. In this part of London, grief was quiet. So was terror, and yet life continued. The laundry was still delivered. The bread was still baked. The match girl still reported for work. Rent still came due. What changed was the silence. It grew deeper, more watchful. Conversations grew shorter. No one knew who Jack the Ripper was, but many were sure they had seen him. The killer became a shape, a silhouette in every alley, a breath on every neck. But he was also something more than a man. He had become an idea. He had become fear itself. And still, the city did not stop. The bells rang. The fog returned. The work resumed. But something in Whitechapel's heart had changed. When the last of the canonical murders came to pass, on a cold November morning in 1888, there was no declaration, no moment of clarity, no sign that the storm had passed. There was only quiet. Not peace, not resolution. Simply the slow return of ordinary noise. The kind of background sound that tells a city it has, somehow, endured. The murder of Mary Jane Kelly, discovered in her small rented room on Miller's Court, had been the most unsettling of all. It shook even the most hardened constables. And yet it was followed by nothing. There were meetings behind closed doors, ministers briefed, inspectors assigned. The press held on for a few more weeks, their headlines still bold, their stories still confident. No more letters, no more bodies, no more answers for a time. The police remained vigilant. Patrols increased. Doors were knocked on. Suspects were questioned. Sketches drawn. Lists compiled. The gas lamps flickered over crowded soup kitchens and long lines at the workhouse gates. The streets of Whitechapel filled once again with the more familiar sounds of survival. But slowly, the city's attention began to drift. There were other crimes, other worries. Winter came in earnest, and with it, hunger, frost, and the return of ordinary hardship. Still, the questions remained. Who had he been? Why had he stopped? Theories began to multiply, and they never truly stopped. Others said he had been committed to an asylum, tucked away behind high stone walls where he would never be heard from again. Became known for its mystery. He was painted, printed, and reimagined, shifting from man to myth, from shadow to spectacle. Some believed the Ripper had died, that he was one of the nameless corpses pulled from the Thames in the months that followed. There were those who believed he had fled, To the north, to France, to the colonies, and others still, fewer, but louder, claimed he had been someone important, someone protected, a doctor, a duke, a man with gloves and secrets and friends in high places. The truth never came, and with time, something curious began to happen. Where there had once been fear, there was now fascination. Where silence had once been uneasy, it became space for imagination. Whitechapel, already known for its hardship, the name Jack the Ripper was printed again and again, in newspapers, in penny pamphlets, in plays, in novels, and still, no one knew who he truly was. The case files remained open for a while. Investigators came and went, reports were written, then shelved, then forgotten. Some detectives kept their own theories, scribbled in the margins of diaries or in letters never sent. But the years moved on. The streets were paved again. Buildings were torn down, rebuilt, renamed, and the fear that had once gripped Whitechapel. By the turn of the century, Jack the Ripper was no longer a threat. He was a story, a whispered name, a puzzle left unsolved. Tourists began to ask about him. Writers followed. Guides took people down the same alleys, now lit with stronger lamps, pointing to where this or that might have happened. Others had burned, or been bombed, or quietly surrendered to time, in the way people still glance over their shoulders in narrow alleys, in mysteries that remain unbroken, in the way a gas lamp can still cast a long shadow that makes one pause. Whitechapel itself changed, slowly and unevenly, but it changed, but as a presence, one that belonged not to any single person, but to the memory of a city caught for a moment between fear and myth. The tenements were improved, sanitation made its cautious way in. Reformers came with pamphlets and plans, some stayed, some did not. By the 1930s, many of the buildings that once stood during that fearful autumn were gone, and yet the story endured, and the click of phone cameras. There are still places in Whitechapel where the past feels very near, not just in history books, but in the corners of the mind. There is a quiet power in unsolved things. They linger, they echo, they invite speculation, gently, endlessly. And so, Jack the Ripper remained, not as a man, not even as a murderer. Even now, as the modern world hums over those same cobblestones, with buses and neon lights, places where the air still hangs just a little heavier, where the fog still rolls in off the river, not because it must, but because it remembers. And just like that, the city breathes again. Jack the Ripper was never caught, but Whitechapel kept walking, and eventually, the fear faded. Before the city choked on smoke, before Whitechapel whispered of shadows, there was a summer when London held its breath, quite literally. The year was 1858, and the river that had always been London's lifeblood became something else entirely. The Thames had long been many things to the people of the city. A waterway, certainly, a trade route, a divider and a unifier. It was the backdrop to daily life and royal procession, the flow beneath London Bridge, the shimmer at twilight. But it was also, for centuries, the city's drain. By the 19th century, London had grown beyond what anyone could reasonably manage. The population had exploded, streets stretched in every direction, bricks rose where fields had once been, and beneath it all, sometimes just a few feet below, lay a tangled network of medieval drains and cesspits, cracked, overwhelmed, misunderstood. For much of London, there was no modern plumbing. The days were warmer than usual, the water lower, the sunlight stronger. It was thought that smells themselves were the carriers of illness. Germs were not yet widely understood. Cleanliness was moral, odor immoral. The color darkened. Floating debris became more common. Everything from rotting vegetables to dead dogs. To be precise, there were over 200,000 cesspools across the city, some lined with brick, others not. These were where waste collected, human waste, mostly, but also animal waste, kitchen water, and all the messes of daily urban life. Others clutched bunches of dried lavender to their faces while walking along the embankment. The fury of disease at the time was miasma, bad air. The wealthy filled their homes with vinegar-soaked cloths and sprayed perfume across their parlors. And the Thames, that summer, smelled worse than ever before. It began slowly. In the early weeks of June, Londoners began to notice it more than usual, a sour, dense smell rising from the riverbanks. The river, normally busy with boats and barges, took on a sluggish, almost stagnant appearance. But it was the smell that truly defined the season. It did not drift gently across the city. It clung, it pressed in, it seeped into curtains and rugs. It filled carriages and seeped under doors. By July, the stench was inescapable. People fled London if they could. Those who remained did what they could to endure. Some wore masks of cotton dipped in camphor. Others clutched bunches of dried lavender to their faces while walking along the embankment. Even Parliament, housed in the newly rebuilt Palace of Westminster, just above the river, was affected. Heavy curtains were draped over the windows. Buckets of disinfectant were placed beneath desks. But nothing helped. The government could no longer sit beside the river it governed. Eventually, the smell became so unbearable that Parliament suspended its meetings. The Times called it simply the Great Stink. There was no mystery, no need for investigators or theories. Everyone knew what the problem was. It was the Thames itself, poisoned by centuries of neglect, and hastily modernized sewers that did not remove waste, but pushed it directly into the water. One physician remarked, "We are daily and nightly breathing a poisonous atmosphere." It was the truth. And yet, through it all, life in London continued. The fog mingled with the stench, making it feel even more oppressive. Gas lamps flickered beside windows firmly shut. People spoke of rain as a blessing, not for the crops, but for the hope it might wash something away. The milkman still walked his route, handkerchief tied tightly around his face. Children still played near the piers, though some refused to go near the riverbanks. Omnibus drivers covered their mouths with gloves as they drove along the Strand. The river flowed on, thick, quiet, choked. Shopkeepers sprinkled lime outside their doors in a desperate attempt to mask the odor. At night, the air was cooler, and in the silence of those humid evenings, this was the beginning. But the Great Stink would not end with suffering. It would, in time, bring something else: action. A man would rise to meet the challenge, and the city, long indifferent to its own waste, would be changed forever. London had reached its limit. By the summer of 1858, the Thames was no longer a river. It was a message, and that message, foul and undeniable, demanded a response. Not a doctor, not a soldier or a nobleman. The man who answered that call was not a politician. He built things not for beauty, but for purpose. His name was Joseph Bazalgette, a man of order, precision, and quiet determination. He did not command crowds. He did not speak with poetic flair. He was the chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, a title that sounded modest, but the weight it carried was enormous. Bazalgette had already been working in London as sewers for years when the Great Stink reached its peak. He understood something few others did. The city could not survive without what lay beneath it. By 1858, his plans were ready, detailed, ambitious, and waiting for approval. They had been delayed for years. Budget concerns, political hesitation, lack of urgency. The river itself had become unbearable. Parliament, forced to flee its own chambers, suddenly discovered its voice. Funds were released, support followed, and Joseph Bazalgette was finally given the mandate and the responsibility to transform London's underworld, brickwork that could last centuries. And he would need to do all of it beneath an already living city, without stopping its heartbeat. Just the sound of boots in mud and the low clatter of tools against stone, and carry it downstream, away from the city, to be released far beyond the reach of the population. The ground unstable, and yet, progress came. It would take the pressure off the old cesspools and connect entire districts in a single, coordinated network. It was, in every sense, a monumental task. At the heart of his plan was a simple idea: stop putting sewage into the Thames. But achieving that required more than a few pipes. It required a system, something the city had never had. Bazalgette envisioned intercepting sewers, vast tunnels that would collect waste before it reached the river. He would need to dig hundreds of miles of tunnels. He would need pumping stations, embankments, bridges. The work began slowly, methodically. There was no groundbreaking ceremony, no grand parade. The first lines were dug by hand. Men descended into trenches 20 feet deep, working by lamplight, often waist deep in water. The air was thick, the ground unstable, and yet, progress came. The bricks used were double-fired and carefully laid. The tunnels were lined and reinforced. His design was not simply good enough, it was more than was needed. Bazalgette was meticulous. He insisted on quality, even when no one would see the results. His team faced endless obstacles: flooding, soil collapse, gas pockets, and always the smell. But the system took shape. Above ground, London carried on. Horse carts rumbled through the streets. Fog drifted past statues. Men in top hats read newspapers that marveled at the invisible revolution beneath their feet. One by one, the pieces were built. The most famous was Crossness, with its soaring ironwork and engines named like ships: Victoria, Prince Consort, Albert Edward, and Alexandra. The northern and southern outfall sewers, carrying waste miles away. The cross-down interceptors, collecting flow from side streets and old pipes, the Victoria, Chelsea, and Albert embankments, which were more than just walkways. They were protective barriers housing some of the most important pipes in the world. The precise thickness of mortar, these details, repeated 1,000 times, became the foundation of London's survival. And the pumping stations, beautiful brick buildings that masked the power beneath. They were not just machines, they were symbols of control, of civilization, of order imposed on chaos. He simply wanted the system to work, and to last. All of this, Bazalgette oversaw. He was not seeking glory, he was not chasing fame. In quiet notes, he remarked on things others ignored, the way water moved, the angle of a junction. By the late 1860s, the core of the system was complete. The river changed, the smell lightened, the banks cleared, the fog, though still common, no longer carried the same sour edge. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the color shifted, and the people noticed. Not all at once, but gradually, the city came to realize what had been done. Without fanfare, without chaos, London had been rebuilt from below. Joseph Bazalgette never became a household name, but the system he built still carries the city's breath to this day. He had solved the great stink not with poetry or panic, but with logic, foresight, and brick, and in doing so, he left behind a legacy you can't see, but still walk upon every day. The Thames never sent a thank you. No trumpet sounded when the water began to clear. No great celebration was held when the river once again reflected the sky. But change had come. By the end of the 1860s, thanks to the work of Joseph Bazalgette and thousands of laborers beneath the surface, London had begun to breathe again. The air was not yet fresh, not entirely, but it no longer turned the stomach. The scent of vinegar no longer lingered in sitting rooms. Curtains, once soaked in disinfectant, were left open again. Windows along the embankment were cracked to let in air, not shut to keep it out. The great cloud that had lingered over the city's riverbanks for so long began to lift. But there was flow now, movement, life. The people noticed it in small ways first. For the first time, modern infrastructure had been recognized not just as a convenience, but as a necessity, that even the river, long romanticized and relied upon, could rebel. Public health, once seen as a matter of personal virtue, was now tied to collective responsibility, of planners, of long-term thinking, and it had proved that a city could transform itself, not with sudden revolutions, but with careful bricks, laid one by one, in darkness. Far beneath the noise of the surface, the river was becoming a river again, and the work of governing was no longer done in a haze of nausea and perfume. The water still bore scars. It would take many more years before fish returned, before birds gathered again along the banks, and for those who lived along the Thames, the washerwomen, the ferrymen, the wharf hands, the difference was unmistakable. The embankments, too, changed the face of London. Where once the streets had crumbled into the water's edge, now they were held firm by stone. New gardens were planted, trees were placed carefully along walkways. People began to stroll by the river, slowly, beneath gas lamps that flickered less and less as the city modernized. In time, even Parliament returned to normal. Curtains came down, windows opened, but more than air had changed. The great stink, that hot, unbearable summer of 1858, had marked a turning point in the city's self-awareness. London had learned that the invisible mattered, that what flowed beneath one man's house eventually reached another. In its own way, the great stink had been a teacher, a foul one, but effective. It had taught the value of engineers, of planners, of long-term thinking, and it had proved that a city could transform itself, not with sudden revolutions, but with careful bricks, laid one by one, in darkness, far beneath the noise of the surface. And Joseph Bazalgette? He carried on, but he never sought public applause. He continued his work for years, modifying, expanding, quietly improving what he had built. He received a knighthood, eventually, a precaution, a margin, something sensible, still carrying London's waste, still holding the city together beneath its feet. He once said that he had designed the system to handle far more than was needed, double, in fact, in kitchens, around coal stoves in the winter. Stories of how bad it had gotten, how handkerchiefs were soaked in brandy, how even Queen Victoria had made comments on the air, and through it all, the river ran quietly through the heart of it all, not perfect, but calm. He could not have known that, over a century later, his pipes would still be in use, and as the 20th century approached, London continued to grow, taller, wider, faster. Trains replaced horse carts, telegraph wires crossed streets, markets gave way to department stores. There were those who remembered the old smell, who still told stories of the year when everything reeked. They told them in pubs, or of the laborers, or of the smell, and then they would shrug and be thankful, because it had changed, because someone had cared enough to dig, because something had been built, and it had worked. Today, when you walk along the Thames, beside the same embankments, under the same bridges, you might not think of Bazalgette. You might not know that, beneath your feet, a quiet river of pipes still flows, shaped by hands you will never meet. But it's there, and the city, in its own quiet way, remembers. While the streets of Whitechapel stirred before dawn with the scraping of boots, and the clatter of coal carts, another London woke much more slowly. This other London, built on wide boulevards, and behind tall black gates, did not wake to whistles or fog horns. It woke to gentle knockings, to drawn curtains, and to the quiet clink of silver. The upper class of Victorian England, those who lived in townhouses in Belgravia, Mayfair, and Kensington, greeted the day not with haste, but with ritual. Imagine yourself waking beneath a canopy of pale linen. The room is quiet, thick carpets hush every sound. The windows, tall and narrow, are shrouded in velvet drapes. The fire was lit for you half an hour before you opened your eyes. Someone crept in while you were still dreaming and laid kindling with practiced care. The smell of coal and wood smoke mingles faintly with lavender water. You do not open them. That task falls to your maid or to your valet, if you are a gentleman, and to thin slices of toast, dry, by design. The tea has been prepared exactly to your liking, not too strong, for a gentleman. Trousers pressed smooth, shirt starched stiff, braces aligned. If the day includes visitors, and it almost certainly will, a second outfit will be readied for the afternoon. A dash of milk, no sugar, or perhaps just one lump. The footman polishes boots, aligning them precisely in the entrance hall. Husbands and wives often dine separately, in their own quarters. To eat together is a gesture, not an expectation. The cook prepares breakfast, not eggs and toast, but something far more deliberate: kedgeree, deviled kidneys, grilled tomatoes, or smoked fish. An invitation, or a reminder. The Duchess of something or other is receiving callers on Tuesday. You will, of course, attend. The paper is monogrammed, the pen, your own. Correspondence is both art and obligation. Dishes are ranged by course, plates warmed, napkins folded with exacting care. You are not cold, predictably. The soft ring of a bell from a milk delivery. Every detail matters: gloves, ribbons, the slight tilt of a bonnet. Or with a man from the Bank of England, he may read reports, how to address a bishop, how to place one's hat when sitting for tea. There are books that explain these things, entire volumes devoted to the art of doing things properly. Review correspondence from an estate in the countryside, or prepare to speak in Parliament, where his voice and his accent will carry weight far beyond the chamber's walls. But from here, inside this town home of polished banisters and high ceilings, the outside world is merely a backdrop. Beside your bed is a small silver tray, on it a cup of tea, still steaming. You do not rush. Morning is not a beginning, it is an unfolding, button by button, lace by lace. Your maid, your valet, they do not speak unless you do. Their silence is not distance, it is etiquette. Your clothes are laid out, every item in its proper order. For a lady, a petticoat, stays, chemise, stockings, bodice. Not joy, necessarily, not ease, despite the servants, but ardor, structure, expectation. You dress with assistance. That, too, is a ritual. Outside, the city moves, but only faintly. You may hear a carriage roll past, the crack of a whip. Downstairs, the household is already active. The butler checks the silver. Breakfast is not a shared affair in many upper-class homes. The newspaper arrives, ironed, not for presentation, but to remove the damp. Your hands must not be smudged. A letter may accompany it. Heavy paper, embossed, sealed with wax. The ink still slightly scented. After breakfast, you may write letters of your own, seated at a small desk beneath a window. For a lady, the morning may then move to the drawing room, where she might arrange flowers, meet with a dressmaker, or choose which hat to wear when she rides out later. For a gentleman, the morning may begin with business. He may have an appointment with his solicitor. All of it unfolds quietly, smoothly. That is the defining feature of upper-class life in Victorian London: order, and beneath it all, 1,000 invisible rules. When to speak, when to bow, which fork to use. To live in this world is to live within a cage of velvet, a soft cage, a gilded one, but a cage, nonetheless. And so, the day begins, polished, pressed, and wrapped in silence. Appearances were everything, not simply in the way one dressed or walked or greeted a guest, but in the entire manner in which one moved through the world. For the Victorian elite, to be seen was to exist, and to be seen properly was to survive. The rituals of morning gave way, gently, to the obligations of the afternoon. There was calling, there was visiting, there were cards, the small, stiff rectangles of embossed identity that were left at front doors as proof of one's presence. These cards were never handed directly unless a meeting was planned. They were delivered by footman or by gloved hand, placed on a silver tray, sometimes passed through a slit in the door. A woman might receive a dozen cards in a single week. Some were social, some obligatory, some strategic. She would sort through them like one might sort through signals, each one carrying meaning. Who had called, who had not. To be connected was to be visible. To be visible was to be trustworthy, or, at the very least, difficult to ignore. Failure to do so could quietly close the door to a future invitation. Who had written a note in the corner? Who had left it blank? To return a call was not merely polite. It was expected. This was the currency of reputation. The color of the wallpaper, the pattern of the rug, even the arrangement of the china. These were all messages, silently read and quietly judged. For gentlemen, appearances were maintained in different ways. A presence at the club, a seat in the House of Commons, a walk along Pall Mall with the right acquaintances. Quietly oppressive. For every polished silver spoon, there were 10 hours of hidden labor. For every fresh cravat, there was an underpaid valet who rose before dawn to press it. A marriage declined, not for lack of love, but for lack of status. For every proper appearance, 1,000 fears hidden behind composed smiles. Every action was a performance, graceful, but not proud, beautiful, but modest, skilled in needlework, conversation, hosting, and child-rearing, but never to show effort. The clothes, the carriage, the accent, the address, each detail mattered. Even silence was a kind of statement. When attending a garden party, hosted perhaps by a countess or the wife of a cabinet minister, one did not simply show up. One had to wear the correct color for the season. One had to know when to approach, when to speak, and when to leave. A gentleman might speak on politics, but never emotion. It was a quiet ballet of self-restraint. The phrase left on the shelf was more than a saying. It was a sentence. Her worth, in the eyes of society, quietly diminished. A lady might be expected to converse fluently on art, music, literature, but never politics, and the house itself was part of the costume. The drawing room must reflect the right tones, not too ornate, lest one appear gaudy, but not too plain, lest one seem unfashionable. Curtains were not just curtains, they were statements of taste. And yet, the pressure to maintain this performance was constant, because to fall, even slightly, could mean exclusion, a missed invitation, a whispered comment, a cousin who didn't quite fit. They were expected to uphold an impossible standard, to be well-read, but never opinionated. A woman who did not marry by a certain age was seen not as independent, but as unfortunate. The phrase left on the shelf was more than a saying, it was a sentence. Her worth, in the eyes of society, quietly diminished. He must not show temper, or sentiment, or need. He must be a pillar, to his wife, to his servants, to his club, and to himself. For men, the pressures were no less real, if differently shaped. To be a man of standing meant inheritance, influence, and bearing. He might never know the cost of bread, but he would be expected to understand Latin, to hold opinions on India. They moved through their roles like actors on a stage built from mahogany and marble, and to know precisely how to tip his hat to a dowager countess. And so, they all played their parts, in the ballroom, in the smoking room, at the opera and at the races. But under the surface many felt the strain. There were letters, private ones, where women admitted exhaustion, and men confessed to loneliness. There were journals, locked away in desks, filled with quiet fears and quiet dreams of something freer. And there were scandals, too, hidden at first, whispered later, affairs, debts, disappearances, all handled delicately, quietly, if possible, erased, because the performance had to go on. In the world of the Victorian upper class, one did not just live, one presented, and beneath the polish was pressure. From the outside, the world of the Victorian upper class seemed complete. There was beauty, there was grace, there were polished floors and silver dishes, soft music behind drawn curtains, gowns that shimmered in candlelight, coaches that creaked past gaslight terraces, and names long, echoing, names that opened doors and filled seating charts. But within this elegant world, many lives moved within invisible walls, a kind of prison. built not of stone, but of expectation. The rules, though never spoken aloud, were everywhere. A lady of society was to be beautiful, but not bold, accomplished, but not ambitious. She might learn French, but never business. She might read poetry, but never write it. A smile when you wished for silence, a compliment when your mind drifted elsewhere. A marriage not for love, but for land. Her education had not prepared her for the world beyond parlors and salons. The staff answered to her, but the estate remained her husband's or a governess in someone else's home. Respected, but not seen. Useful, but not heard. Even her children, in the eyes of law, were not fully hers. A silence at dinner when your heart longed to speak, to show confidence, but never confusion, to win, politely, to lose, gracefully, and to do it all without asking for help. This was the gilded cage. For women, the bars were woven into every season. Others took refuge in gardens, in correspondence, in music. A few found friendship, real, deep friendship, though even that required care. Too much affection could be misunderstood, too much honesty unwelcome. Her days were filled with engagements, teas, fittings, luncheons, walks, but often, beneath the routine, a quiet hollowness remained. Few choices were truly hers. Many women found ways to live with this. Some became patrons of charities. Some women married well and happily. Many did not. Attending Eton, or Harrow, or Oxford meant more than education. It meant learning how to move, how to command, how to endure. Once married, a woman's domain was the household, but only within limits. And if she did not marry, she became a shadow, a companion, perhaps to a wealthier cousin. For men, the cage was carved from duty. Heir to a title, you must uphold it. Son of a merchant, you must elevate it. From a young age, boys of the upper class were told to suppress, to speak clearly, but not emotionally, to show confidence, but never confusion, to win, politely, to lose, gracefully, and to do it all without asking for help. Many did. They grew into men who spoke in measured tones, who rode well, dressed well, voted carefully. Some escaped abroad, to colonial posts or ocean voyages, and some drifted quietly to the margins, no longer able or willing to play the part. And there were secrets of desire, of illness, of struggle, that no one dared name aloud. But not all. Some turned inward, quiet melancholies hidden beneath waistcoats and walking sticks. Behind closed doors, things were not always as polished. There were debts hidden beneath generous loans from relatives. There were failed businesses, concealed with family names. There were marriages kept intact for appearance alone. What if I am not who they believe I must be? Because in this world, even suffering had to be dignified. The clink of fine china on a morning when the light fell just right across the tablecloth. A glance across a room that meant more than it should. There were bright moments, of course. Balls in spring, letters filled with laughter, the joy of a new child, the quiet beauty of a garden in bloom. But even these were laced with caution. What if someone sees? What if someone hears? And so, the cage remained soft, padded, decorated in velvet and lace. But always there. The rich were not free, not entirely. They moved through rooms of great beauty, but often longed for something simpler. Industrialists dined where dukes once ruled. Women spoke more clearly, men more softly. Books were written that questioned it all. The world was turning, not quickly, but inevitably. They dined from crystal and silver, but sometimes wished only to speak plainly. They were admired, envied, even obeyed, but rarely known. And as the 19th century waned, cracks began to appear. Voices rose in Parliament. New fortunes challenged old names. The Victorian elite still held power, but it no longer rested on ceremony alone. A new age was beginning to stir, and so, the tea was poured, the gloves removed, and the candlelight, at last, extinguished. Behind the curtains the day ended, as quiet as it began. And now we rest. We have walked, quietly, through the rooms and alleys of a long-vanished London. We have woken in the damp shadow of a slum, where children stirred in straw and factory whistles broke the dawn. We felt the rough fabric of patched coats, the ache of thin shoes, and the steady rhythm of survival. A life not written in history books, but lived, one quiet hour at a time. We stepped then into the fog, into the tense hush of Whitechapel's haunted nights. We did not follow the blood, but the breath of a city holding itself still. We saw how even within luxury, one can be bound, not by chains, but by etiquette, not by hunger, but by expectation. And in those high-ceilinged rooms, where nothing was out of place, we saw how much was never said. The great stink, thick and undeniable, forced a reckoning, not of empire, but of water, waste, and responsibility. And from it, an answer was built in brick and tunnel. Out of decay came design. We watched as fear rose and then slowly fell, replaced by myth and silence. We listened to the river groan beneath the weight of its past. And at last, we ascended, to velvet halls, to polished floors, to the quiet tyranny of perfection. 4 lives, 4 worlds, all part of the same city, all woven into the slow breath of time. And now, that city is still. Its chimneys no longer smoke. Its gas lamps are dim. The carriages have rolled away, the curtains drawn. And you, let the streets grow silent. Let the river run smooth and unseen. You are far from it now, wrapped in warmth, in stillness, in quiet. Let the past drift like mist across the cobblestones. Sleep now, if you haven't already. The history will wait, it always does. Good night.